406.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the 411 from 406. My name is Chewie, and I'm joined once again by my brother from another mother, Mr. Pip. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. I mean, first things first, where the fuck have we been?
This has not been a good stretch. It has been, we're sitting here on the 21st of July right now as we record this. The last time we recorded was the May the 26th. So we are almost 2 months out from the last time we recorded, which I think is fair to say is way longer than either of us would hope to go between episodes. So for my part in that, I apologize. For me, it's been all baseball all the time. We had, between three boys, we had almost 200 baseball games since between April and late July. So
Jesus
we're done.
Lord.
We're done for the summer, which is I love baseball, but I'm looking forward to having a couple weeks off where I don't have to go to a baseball field.
Oh, I could totally see that. And I'm similar, although certainly not to that quantity. My girls were playing baseball and softball as well. So there were a lot of things getting in the way, but I'm just as guilty as you are in terms of scheduling this. We've had to put it off a couple times because of various life events and things going on, but I don't care. We're here. And we are here to wrap up what is going to be the final episode of our Star Wars prequel deep dive series. How are you feeling about this as we're going into it?
I'm super pumped, actually. And even though the last episode of the series, and I guess by extension, the last episode of the podcast was a little bit more negative, right?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think we both just both universally kind of hated that film. I'm pumped coming into this. And I remember I was pumped coming into this film back in 2005 when it came out. And I'm super excited to have this conversation. We chatted just real briefly before we started recording, and we didn't even want to kind of talk much chit chat. We just wanted to kind of turn on and start recording. So I'm really excited to see kind of where this one goes tonight.
As am I, for sure. And I think that it's interestingly for me, this was harder to get myself to watch the movie again. And I think maybe it's just because the last two times we talked, we did these deep dives on The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. And as much as I love doing the podcast, sometimes the research for these and watching the movies and pausing and taking notes and things like that can be a bit of a labor of love. So it was a little bit of a chore to get myself to watch this movie. And if I'm doing it during the week, I'll be honest, I'm an old man now and I have to break it up into multiple nights sometimes because I just can't sit down and watch 2.5 hours of Star Wars at night as much as I used to be able to do. So it was a little bit tougher, but once I got going, it was a really interesting experience and one that I wasn't really expecting. And I think we're going to get to that, but it wasn't nearly as difficult getting through it as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a similar experience. I actually sat down and rewatched this one with my youngest boy. And I think this was the first time that he had ever seen this film.
Oh, nice.
And so ironically enough, we have a book that I read him at night called 5-Minute Star Wars Stories. And it's a great kind of bedtime book because each chapter is about 5 minutes. And, there's probably, 3 or 4 from each movie. And so that was really his only experience with Revenge of the Sith. And so as we were watching stuff, he goes, "Oh, hey, is this from that book that we were reading last night?" And I said, "Yeah, it was." And my memory of this film was pretty negative, if I'm being honest. It was, this entire trilogy had one goal, right? It was to show the fall of Anakin Skywalker and the turn into Darth Vader. And we'll get there. We'll talk about that scene or those scenes extensively. But I remember, even as we were talking on the 2 previous podcasts of this series, and I remember being really kind of negative heading into this film. And I have to say, rewatching it again, it wasn't as negative as I thought it was going to be. I actually thoroughly enjoyed rewatching it again, coming back to it. And one of the questions that I had for you, so one of the big things that has happened since our previous podcast was the release of the Disney Plus series Obi-Wan Kenobi. And not to get into a whole big thing review of that series, but I wanted to ask you, did watching that series change how you looked at this film at all?
I think it's fair to say that's possible that it did. And I don't know how, I don't know why. I couldn't really explain it, but for some reason it was more tolerable to rewatch this movie after having watched that series. And it's not even because I thought the series was the greatest thing that ever existed. I definitely, there were some very, very high parts of the Obi-Wan series that I really liked. There were some things that I thought were not really well done, but I know that they had a lot of challenges trying to squeeze in the continuity because they had movies that came before that. They have movies that come after that. So they had to be very conscious of some of the decisions that they made. And some of them I don't think were really smart in terms of the characters and the whole Leia thing. And I don't know. I mean, we can get into that another time, but I think what I took away from it is that I really grew a better appreciation for the relationship between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. And when I took that, learned from their relationship in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, and I brought it with me to revisit the Revenge of the Sith, it really complemented it in a way I was not expecting. I'm not really sure if that makes any sense, but that was my take on it.
No, I think it does. I think, and again, I'm not sure that series makes this film a quote better film, but there are some films that I think kind of get better with time. There are other films that get worse, right, and just really don't hold up. And at least for me, this one is actually getting better over time. And again, I don't know if that's I'm aging. I don't know if I'm picking up new things that I hadn't seen before. I don't know if it's that there's more context out there, of books and series like Obi-Wan and those kind of things. Yeah, this one is actually getting better for me as time moves on, which surprised me, quite frankly, especially coming off of Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, I think this series did a good job of convincing me that I shouldn't focus so much on the turn of Anakin Skywalker and really should focus more on the relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan. And when I looked at it from that perspective, the things that bothered me the first couple times didn't bother me as much, because the one thing that I think that they got really right in this movie was, again, the relationship between the two and how it started kind of strong at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. And then it sort of even stronger so than I think it was in Attack of the Clones. And then it really trails off as Anakin's descent becomes more and more prevalent. So I thought that it gave me something different to focus on, which I thought was interesting.
All right, so let's go ahead and we'll start into this. And I imagine we will kind of revisit a lot of these questions and topics and those kind of things as we go. So the Revenge of the Sith, it is the third film in the Star Wars prequel trilogy. It was released on May the 15th, 2005. It is written and directed once again by the one and only George Lucas. It was produced by Rick McCallum. It stars essentially the exact same cast as the previous film: Ewan McGregor, Natalie Portman, Hayden Christensen, Ian McDiarmid, Samuel L. Jackson, Christopher Lee, Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker, and Frank Oz. It is the highest grossing film of 2005. It had a budget. It was actually the lowest budget of the prequels at only, quote unquote, only 113 million. The other two films at 115 million. Had a box office of $868 million, which by today's standards, I don't know, might even seem a little bit low, but that was just a massive number. I mean, this was pre-Avengers and pre all of these $1 billion films. Again, if you recall, Attack of the Clones was only about 650 million. The Phantom Menace was just over $1 billion. Still to this day, it holds the record for the highest opening day gross on a Thursday, which I thought was kind of cool. Made right over 50 million bucks. It only won one Golden Raspberry Award, and that was for Best Supporting Actor or Worst Supporting Actor for Hayden Christensen. And I will certainly talk about that, because I can remember coming out of this film, I had a really, really poor outlook on Hayden Christensen. And again, part of that has softened over the years as well, at least for me. Again, it is the direct sequel to A Phantom Menace. It takes about 3 years in between the two films. A lot of the criticism initially was around Christensen's acting, obviously, and the dialogue, right? And one thing that I noticed, if you go back and you read reviews from back then, and then if you go back and you look at kind of more recent reviews of the film, I think it's pretty consistent with what you and I have been saying. It has softened a little bit. And I think a lot of the criticism these days is actually not so much on Christensen, but it's on the dialogue and it's on the writing and the directing of George Lucas. I just can't understate how poorly in my opinion, some of these scenes and films are directed by George Lucas. And I hate to say that because he's an icon, but he didn't do the universe a great service with some of these scenes specifically.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that we've noted pretty prolifically throughout this series that has been a problem the entire time. It was never more obvious than it was in Attack of the Clones. And in this movie, I think there are pieces of it that get better. I don't know if it's just because of the heightened drama that sort of overshadows some of the dialogue, but if you listen to them talk, it's still so stilted in a way that is almost distracting in some scenes, especially in the beginning. There's I think the first exchange between Padme and Anakin when, she tells him that she's pregnant, and some of those lines back and forth are just like, oh, they're painful. They're so hard to listen to.
Yeah. There's one that to me that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. They are, I don't know, in their house or apartment or whatever it is. And he says something like, she says, I'm so in love with you. And he says, no, I'm so in love with you. It's just, it's just the worst. And
see, I just threw up in my mouth a little when you said it. So yeah.
Right. The title obviously is in reference to Revenge of the Jedi, which was the original title of Return of the Jedi. Fun fact, I actually have a old school 1983 poster of Revenge of the Jedi somewhere. It's in terrible shape, but I actually do have one of those posters.
Like it can't be one of the original posters.
It is. Yeah.
Because they only made like 6,000 of them.
Yeah, it's tattered. It's in terrible shape, but I do have one. Now, it might have been a reprint even from back then, but it was. Yeah.
Still though, it's my favorite movie poster of all time.
Yeah.
It is the holy grail of movie posters.
So, and the last kind of pre-work that I did, I wanted to read this particular passage. I think I got this off Wikipedia, but it's really, I wanted to read it because I think it's really important because it's one of the things that we have talked about in several podcasts coming up to this. And I think, we'll certainly talk about it in this podcast as well. So it said, after principal photography was complete in 2003, Lucas made even more changes in Anakin's character, rewriting the entire turn sequence. Lucas accomplished this rewrite through editing and principal footage and filming new scenes during pickups in London in 2004. In the previous versions, Anakin had myriad reasons for turning to the dark side, one of which was his sincere belief that the Jedi were plotting to take over the Republic. Although this is still intact in the finished film, by revising and refilming many scenes, Lucas emphasized Anakin's desire to save Padme from death. Thus, in the version that made it to the theater, Anakin's fall to the dark side primarily to save Padme. I think that's a really interesting passage because, again, my one main criticism of this film over the years has been that it failed to do its one job, which was to tell the turn. And I just thought that was an interesting passage. Again, in my mind, it doesn't let Lucas off the hook, but it shows me that there was at least more thought there than what we got in the final version of the film.
That is interesting. I don't think I've heard that.
That's all the homework that I did. So
you left out one critical piece. This was the only prequel movie that you and I saw together in the theaters, right? I believe
that is, you are correct, sir. Yes.
We touched on this, I think, in a previous episode, but this was one of the many years that I came out to Cleveland to see you, but I did not come for our traditional WrestleMania viewing. This one was specifically for Revenge of the Sith back in 2005. And I even remember being in the theater. I remember there being some cosplayers that were lightsaber fighting in the very front of the theater going back and forth.
Yes.
And I have a memory of, I'm not even sure we got to sit together, or maybe were we with somebody else or I don't know. There was something really weird about the seating arrangement that I remember. But at any rate, we were at this, what we thought at the time was going to be the last Star Wars movie ever made, together in the theater, which was both poetic and a lot of fun.
Yes, you're right. You're right. I did leave that out, and you're right. Yeah, it's the only one we saw together, and I hope it's not the last one. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, needless to say, if there are more, we will be there. All right. Well, let's get things started with our crawl, as we always do. War, as it starts. The Republic is crumbling under attacks by the ruthless Sith Lord Count Dooku. There are heroes on both sides. Evil is everywhere. In a stunning move, the fiendish droid leader, General Grievous, has swept into the Republic capital and kidnapped Chancellor Palpatine, leader of the Galactic Senate. As the separatist droid army attempts to flee the besieged capital with their valuable hostage, two Jedi Knights lead a desperate mission to rescue the captive Chancellor. So the heroes on both sides thing is something to this day I still don't understand. Does that, I mean, I don't I don't want to get into too much of a discussion before we even get into the discussion, but what the hell does that mean?
I can only assume that this is just a poor choice of words, and they're meaning like fighters on both sides, because clearly there's not heroes on both sides, right? We're not rooting for anybody but our side. So yeah, I think it's just a poor choice of words.
That makes sense. That actually makes a lot of sense, and I'm hoping that is the case, because otherwise it makes no sense. But to kick things off, it's so we're about 3 years after that last pile of clones, as we open immediately on a pretty intense space battle, and probably my favorite of the entire prequel trilogy, as Anakin and Obi-Wan are trying to find their way to the kidnapped Chancellor. And to start the commentary right away, I love the pace. I love the way that they're starting this movie, because we've had two movies. The first one with a lot of story, the second one with some story and just a lot of fucking boring. And I'm feeling that this is the right way to start this. We don't need to tell as much story. We're going to jump right into some action. And I think the special effects, especially in this scene, but throughout a lot of this movie, are definitely holding up better than the previous two. That's my first impression. Do you agree with that?
Wholeheartedly. The first, I don't know, I don't know what it is, 15 minutes, 20 minutes of this movie, I agree. It's paced almost perfectly. It starts out, you are right in the middle of a battle. They do some really nice cinematography where at the very opening, you just see Obi-Wan and Anakin talking, and then they like do a spin and boom, they're right over this battle, right over Coruscant. And we have a little scene where they're kind of flying up to Grievous's ship, and then once they hit that ship, I mean, it's go time. Within the first 10 minutes of the movie, you got lightsabers, you got droids, you got space battles, actually good dialogue, and you're showing the interaction between the clones and the Jedi. You're seeing the interaction between Obi-Wan and Anakin. That's a long way of saying yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I love this opening sequence. It's awesome.
So once aboard the general's ship, we meet General Grievous for the first time, who apparently is an asthmatic precursor to what Anakin would soon become. After some cheeky hijinks, including R2 flying around setting battle droids on fire, our heroes are going to stumble upon an imprisoned, air quotes, Palpatine. Dooku approaches when Obi-Wan says the highly ironic,
"Chancellor Palpatine, Sith Lords are our specialty."
And a 2-versus-1 battle ensues. Now, Christopher Lee, who's clearly still played primarily by a stunt double with a CGI'd face, does a pretty decent job of holding both the Jedi at bay until Anakin gets the best of him. Palpatine orders Anakin to execute Dooku, and he does so with Obi-Wan laying there unconscious. I feel like this part, for me personally, I don't want to say I had a problem with it, but I didn't feel like Anakin had enough hesitation before he just executed Count Dooku. Like that one just like zip lopped off his head, and then it was done. We know that he's pushing harder and harder towards the dark side, but this one went real quick for me.
Yeah, and here's again, I mentioned it in my intro here. In my mind, this trilogy had one job. Its one job was to show the fall of Anakin to the dark side. Unfortunately, the first two movies did a piss poor job at that, in my opinion. And so it's all left to this movie to show that turn. And you're right. This is to say this is a kind of sharp right turn just right out of the gate. It was jarring. It was like, oh shit, like we just leveled up big time. And you're right. He didn't hesitate. And he was kind of afterwards, he was like, well, that's not the Jedi way. I shouldn't have done that. But like after that, he was like, okay, yeah, he just kind of moved on and he just kind of forgot it, or at least that's the way it was on the page. So yeah, this was a little bit out of left field, and it was an awesome scene. Don't get me wrong, but you're right. I don't think Anakin had quite earned this level of angst quite yet, at least on the screen.
Sure. And I actually really like that point you made. I think that Anakin moved on from it very quickly. It's not just that he did it without any real significant remorse. It's that we never revisit that again. It doesn't weigh on him moving forward.
No.
And that seems surprising to me. I got a question for you. This is a bit off script, but it's a thought that came to me the other day, because we've talked a lot about this one job that this series had. And the more I thought about it, we spent so much of the first two movies building story, but not building enough of Anakin's story. And then it seems like this third movie kind of rushes that through. I almost think it would have made more sense for the climax of the second movie to be where Anakin becomes Darth Vader. And then the entire third movie becomes Obi-Wan's attempt to either bring him back to the good side, or maybe some of the Obi-Wan versus Darth Vader stuff that we end up seeing in the Obi-Wan series or something like that, because we all knew where this was going to end. There was no reason to save it to the very end of the third movie. Why not let it go at the end of the second movie and have the whole third movie be, holy shit, what are we going to do now? Like, I think that would have been kind of interesting and maybe paced a little bit more appropriately.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And you could have done that pretty easily with just kind of getting rid of the Phantom Menace, right? I mean, in my opinion, that film, even though it probably holds up better than Attack of the Clones did, it was really kind of a throwaway film. When you look at the overall kind of arc of the Skywalker saga, I mean, yeah, you see that Anakin was made of the midichlorians, whatever. You see that, you see him taken away from his mother. But I mean, you could have explained a lot of that just in a crawl, right? Or,
exactly.
So, I mean, in fact, think about it, right? I mean, you could have started this trilogy at the beginning of Attack of the Clones, never seen the Phantom Menace, and then, you're only two movies. I agree with you. Yeah, that would have been, I think, pacing wise, and it certainly would have made the overall trilogy, I think, better.
Well, they could have cut out a lot of the political, discourse, context, whatever, and just stuck to what we all wanted to see, which was Anakin Skywalker. But
see, that's a really good point, because and I understand clearly George Lucas wanted all that politics in there, right? And I don't know if he's trying to tell, if he's trying to make some sort of a relation to modern politics, current day stuff, this, that, and the other thing. But like, none of that stuff really ever goes anywhere. And it doesn't really, it doesn't really matter in the grand. I mean, yeah, it's the backdrop for why we're having a clone war. And it's the very, very backdrop of how Sidious comes to power. But beyond that, I don't know. I think there's better ways to do that. And I think a lot of that politics probably just could have been left out.
Well, I agree with all that. And I think the important takeaway from what you just said was that it was really about Sidious coming to power and the Empire being created. I think that was sort of the secondary story, only it kind of became the primary story, really, because Sidious is the one behind the scenes in this entire trilogy that is pulling all the strings and doing all that work. So it's pretty interesting, but I wonder how he could have rewritten a third movie or combined the first two if it meant putting Darth Vader's appearance. I mean, imagine that scene at the end of this movie where he rises into frame, you know, as he's being created. Imagine that being the stinger at the end of the second movie. Like that would be fucking great to just end the movie like that and have us all be like, oh, damn it. It would have been amazing. But I digress. So before our heroes can escape, they're all captured by General Grievous, and another escape attempt begins as the Jedi fight these androids with staffs that can block lightsabers. When did this happen? I don't know. Contrivance, fair enough. Whatever, bygones. Grievous escapes as the ship plummets to the ground, but not before Anakin takes control and lands the large vessel. And overall, I got to be honest, I'm pretty impressed with what I've seen so far. As we talked about, the action sequence pretty much eclipses everything that happened in the last movie. The first 10 minutes of this movie are better than the entire Attack of the Clones movie.
Yep. Yeah. From the time of the opening scroll to the time that half of a ship lands, it's amazing. And you're right. That 20 minutes or however long it was is better than the entire second movie.
The Chancellor's returned to Coruscant, and Anakin is reunited with Padme, where she lets us all know that she's pregnant. We get some more clunky dialogue between the two, as we kind of talked about, and just to remind us that nothing has changed. And Anakin has a premonition about Padme's fate, which is sort of a new storyline. Palpatine continues sowing the seeds of discontent between the two of them and the Jedi as he makes Anakin his personal representative on the Jedi Council. And I'm liking the fact that this story, at least so far, feels more focused than what we were doing in the last movie. I feel like the politics are taking a back seat to what Palpatine is ultimately trying to do, which is to play Anakin against the Jedi to ultimately win his favor.
Yeah, I agree. So a question as I was watching this, was Palpatine's ultimate goal, was it to come to power and then Anakin / Darth Vader was a kind of a side quest to that? Or was Palpatine's ultimate goal to turn Anakin because he knew he was, quote, the chosen one? Like was Palpatine more concerned with the rise of the Empire, or was he more concerned with the rise of the Sith?
I think he was definitely concerned more with the rise of the Empire, because he's doing all this from the shadows and from the holograms in the first movie, in The Phantom Menace, before he even knows of Anakin Skywalker. So I think at some point, and I don't believe that point is made very clear to the viewers, he becomes aware of Anakin and decides, well, now that I don't have Darth Maul by my side, I'm going to take on Count Dooku. And then maybe sometime throughout the Attack of the Clones, he realizes that Anakin is going to be more powerful. Where I don't think we're really shown that moment or told when that moment is, but I think that that's just sort of a byproduct of his overall plan, which is to rule the galaxy.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, again, I wasn't. It was the first time I had that thought. I wasn't quite sure.
Yoda and the Council accept Anakin, but they deny him the position of master, which creates a lot of frustration with him. Obi-Wan then tells Anakin on behalf of the Council to spy on Palpatine as both sides continue positioning against each other. And we pan back to Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Windu, who are discussing whether or not the prophecy has been misread. And I wanted to take a second to talk about this prophecy, because it is talked about on a very high level throughout this trilogy, but we don't know what the actual prophecy is. But I did do some Google foo, and in a canon novel called The Master and Apprentice, the prophecy has been revealed as follows: only through sacrifice of many Jedi will the Order cleanse the sin done to the nameless. The danger of the past is not past, but sleeps in an egg. Okay, let me finish. When the egg cracks, it will threaten the entire galaxy. It will threaten the galaxy entire. When the Force itself sickens, past and future must split and combine. A chosen one shall come, born of no father, and through him will ultimate balance in the Force be restored. So before I had read all that, my question was, is Anakin really the one that we're supposed to believe that prophecy is about? I think at this point, we have to assume that is the case, because it specifies towards the end, a chosen one shall come born of no father. and Anakin was allegedly immaculately conceived. If we are to believe Shmi, that she didn't get drunk on some blue milk and just don't remember that one night at the Mos Eisley Cantina.
Right.
But at some point I thought, well, maybe it's Luke. And I think a lot of people have talked about that. But if this is now canon and this is to be true, how much credibility does this prophecy have at this point?
So just so I'm clear, back in episode 1, Mace Windu, I believe, says something to the effect of, you believe this is the one who will bring balance to what does he say? You believe it's this boy, like this is the one, the prophecy who will bring balance to the Force. Is it this is the same so what you're saying is that the big long passage that you just read, that's the same prophecy that Windu is referring to?
Allegedly. Yeah.
Okay,
yes,
allegedly.
that's I do think this is the prophecy. I do believe this.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess there was never really, in my mind, there was never really a doubt that it was Anakin that they're referring to. I suppose you could make a case that it's Luke, or I guess you could even make a case that it's Rey. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that it's Anakin. What I always found interesting about if it's Anakin was, before we knew Anakin, all we had was 2 Sith and a bunch of Jedi. So if you're going to bring balance to that, like before Anakin, the light side was kind of winning, right? So if you're going to bring balance to that, he kind of had to be bad in order to bring balance to it.
Unless the balance that they're referring to doesn't come until after Anakin Skywalker throws the Emperor down the shaft. Maybe the prophecy was just not fulfilled at that point. I don't know. That's a complete stretch, but technically you could say he restores balance when he chucks the Emperor, into the Death Star, and balance is then therefore restored because Luke is the only Jedi left at that point, and there is essentially quote unquote balance to the Force. I don't know. I wanted to bring that up because I thought the prophecy thing was really interesting, but they never really explored that storyline.
So that's interesting. Yeah, so that's interesting. So you said that that's canon. That's in a novel
from 2019, and everything from whatever 2017 on is basically Disney / Lucasfilm approved.
Canon.
So it is canon. So that's my, again, this was my Google foo. So hopefully I landed on that.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense then, right? Because that means that entry into canon came after all of this, right? It came after all these movies. It came after Mace Windu said that. So yeah, I guess it's kind of giving us some additional detail around that prophecy. So yeah, I guess I'm okay with Anakin is the one that they're talking about.
I don't know where we're cracking eggs with the prophecy, but hey, whatever.
Is it maybe it's Neo, right?
Oh, perhaps. I don't know. I do love a good prophecy. Anakin then finds Palpatine at the Opera House of Throat Singing, feature a Blink If You Miss It cameo by George Lucas himself. And we learn 2 critical things here. First, that Grievous is in the Utapau system, and we hear the story, which is the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. And I'm going to go ahead and say that this is probably my favorite scene in the entire trilogy. I just think that the storytelling and the setup and the acting and the way that Ian McDiarmid delivers all of this is so spot on. It is, I think one of the things that I love about this movie the most is his sort of unraveling himself as this fiendish Sith Lord, from the beginning, which he's very much lighter in the role in the beginning, and then it just gets heavier and heavier by the way he talks throughout the movie. I noticed that more and more this time through, and he just gets more menacing, and this is the moment where you can really see what he's plotting in his head.
For as bad as the fall of Anakin Skywalker to Darth Vader is, the rise of Palpatine to Emperor is that good.
I agree.
It is. I mean, we're talking about balance a lot. It is the exact opposite, right?
Mhm.
One is terrible and one is amazing. And you're right. And there's one line in specifically in here where he says, "Not from a Jedi," and just the way he says it and the
Yes.
inflection in his voice. And if there was a doubt, and there's still probably, well, let's see, I'm trying to think back, because I remember there were all these theories. Is Palpatine Sidious? Are they clones? Is it the same guy? If there was a doubt, this scene erased all doubt. Like,
Yes.
It's the same guy, period, paragraph, end of story. Now we know beyond a shadow of a doubt. And again, I know later in the movie he will reveal himself, but it was this scene. Now I have a question about this scene. I've had a question about the scene since I saw it.
Is it about throat singing? Because that's all I can hear in the background.
It's not.
Okay.
I could make up something about throating, but I won't.
Well, this is semi PG. PG-13.
So Palpatine tells the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise, and he tells the story about how he was killed in his sleep by his apprentice. Was Palpatine his apprentice?
Yes, he was.
Okay,
absolutely.
Okay.
That is canon at this. I'm pretty sure it's canon. There was a book called Darth Plagueis that I tried to read and had a lot of trouble getting through.
Okay.
I don't remember the timeline of when that was, but yes, Darth Plagueis's apprentice was Palpatine.
Okay,
and
good.
Palpatine did kill him in his sleep.
Okay.
So
again, I was almost positive based on this, but I just okay, good. That makes me happy that is.
But
confirmed.
when we saw that, we didn't know, right? Like that we had no idea, and that's why that scene was so perfect, because he put enough layer of doubt in there. It's like, well, I'm not really sure, but this guy is so menacing that it could very well be true. And it's almost like the Joker in the Dark Knight. It's like, who cares if it's true? It's a great fucking story, and I'm going with it.
The other thing that I picked up on, probably maybe for the first time when I watched this, if you watch this scene, he makes it sound as if the secrets to essentially immortality or saving somebody from death is something that he knows. He I don't know if he ever comes out and say it, but he makes it pretty clear to me that he knows that secret. Okay. Fast forward to the end of the film, and he basically changes his tune to the point where he says, like, well, we can find the secret, or we can learn it. And it was really interesting to me, because it was the worst bait and switch ever if you're Anakin, right? Because Anakin does all these terrible things in the name of presumably his wife, saving his wife. And then he gets there and he's like, yeah, we'll figure it out. Like the two of us, we'll work on it. You know, I don't know. It was the first time I'd ever kind of picked up on that.
Oh, so, yeah, no, I think that was very intentional. He lied. Yeah. He basically, he pulled a sales guy on him, and he basically said, yeah, sure. He appealed to Anakin's primal urges, and that's how he got him to really believe. And
I don't know, maybe everybody picked up on that the first time they saw it. I didn't really pick up on it until just now.
It's not super obvious, and that scene is spaced apart far enough from his actual turn that it's not apparent unless you see it on a subsequent watch. But yeah, I agree. I love that. It's almost just like a really little nuance to that. So Yoda has made his way to the Wookiee planet of Kashyyyk, because I guess we needed to put a forest planet in this movie. And while it did have some cool battle scenes, it seemed mostly pointless to me. I don't know. Does it feel like the most elaborate side quest just to get a Chewbacca cameo?
Yeah, I mean, this trilogy, it's playing on, well, and the third trilogy as well, they play on a lot of the same beats over and over, right? You've got a desert planet, you've got you've got in this one, you've got a forest planet. So this is the stand-in for Endor. I will say, if I have to choose between Kashyyyk and Endor, I'll choose Kashyyyk all day long, because it's Wookiees versus Ewoks. But yeah, I mean, you could have done without this. I mean, this one could have been just one of in the montage of Order 66 that you got just as easily. But it gave us Chewie, and it gave us, some pretty cool scenes. And the one thing that I did really, really like about these scenes on Kashyyyk and I'm sure they did it on purpose. It's the fight between biology and mechanical, droid versus, organic.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
Good point.
again, I'm sure that's by design.
Yeah, and it very closely mirrors Return of the Jedi in that respect too, as they were fighting AT-ATs with giant trees, basically.
Right.
So Obi-Wan pleads for patience, but Anakin continues to talk himself closer and closer to the dark side. And I know that we kind of touched on this, but this is really the point where I feel like it's fair to talk more about the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin. It might be, I think it definitively is one of the things that they did best in this movie. It feels very natural. And you can tell that there are moments when they're really trying hard to pull it together. Like Anakin and him are very close at the beginning of the movie, and then they start to pull apart a little bit. And then Anakin's like, "Hey, man, I'm sorry. I'm going to try to be better." And Anakin's like, "Oh, man, that's cool. Don't worry about it. You're a much better Jedi than I am." And you feel like they're closer than ever, even though you know how this story is going to end. And I don't know why, but this time through, when I'm watching this movie, I'm way more at peace with this. And I think I think we have to give credit to the Obi-Wan series and say that did such a good job of highlighting their relationship and the sadness behind what eventually happens, that when you're watching this movie after having watched that series, it's like, oh man, I know where this is going. And I thought they both played it well. I don't think that Christensen deserved any disgrace from anything he did in this movie. You can argue Attack of the Clones, but I think he did great with what he had here.
No, I agree. Again, we could talk about the dialogue, but you know what? It's only the dialogue between Anakin and Padme. It is not the dialogue between Anakin and Obi-Wan. And I don't know if that's because Ewan McGregor is a better actor than Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman's a great actress, so I don't know that either. But maybe it's just that George Lucas doesn't do like romantic relationships very well.
I don't know that he can write women. I don't think he can write dialogue for women. It just doesn't, because Natalie Portman is a really good actress, but she comes across as not that great in any of these movies. Right. And I don't think that's her fault. I think it's the dialogue that she's given. Yeah.
The scene and it becomes the last scene where they are Obi-Wan and Anakin are together before they come back together on Mustafar. Yeah, you're right. When you understand where this is going, and you understand that that's the last time that they see one another as brothers, it's tough to watch. You know what I mean? Like it hits you right in the feels if you care about these characters the way I think us and millions of other Star Wars nerds out there do. It's a really well done scene. That's the scene where, and I think you just mentioned it, that's the one where he was like, "You're a wise Jedi, you're a great Jedi." Blah, blah, blah. And I think the last words that they say to each other were, "May the force be with you."
That scene was strangely, it really hit me. I don't know. There was something that was kind of powerful about that specific scene that I never picked up on before. And I felt like that was the last time, their last attempt to really try to mend those fences before things went way off the rails. And there's something so sort of sad about watching that, knowing where this is all going, with them trying to pull it all back together, and they just can't.
Yeah. And I really think that this is where the Obi-Wan Kenobi series really enhances this movie. And again, we're not going to go into all the details of that series, but for as much as I could have kind of take or leave some of the Leia stuff, what that series did really, really well is it enhanced the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin. And especially in the last episode of that series, where Anakin, and you see, spoiler alert, sorry, if you've not seen Obi-Wan, tune out. So Anakin's helmet, or Darth Vader's helmet, is cut, and you see Anakin's face, and they're going back and forth between the distorted voice of Vader and the voice of Anakin, and you really can kind of see Obi-Wan give up, right? And you understand that up until that point he still thought Anakin was in there, right? Yeah. And I think he even says a line, something like, "My brother is finally dead," or whatever he says, and it's you come back to this scene in that movie and you recognize just how much of a relationship they really did have. They weren't just Jedi buddies. They were, they
were brothers.
They really were. You were my brother, Anakin. That's absolutely.
Yeah. So Obi-Wan then makes a trip to Utapau to seek out Grievous when we get our first
Hello there.
As he drops in on this army of
so good
droids. Grievous unleashes 4 lightsabers at once, and backups arrive as the clone troopers provide the necessary relief. Grievous then escapes on some kind of miniature Ferris wheel as Obi-Wan and this giant lizard chase after him. It looks cooler than I'm describing it. Getting to a climax where Obi-Wan basically rips open his chest plate and shoots him mercilessly in the heart. And all I can think of is, wow, technology really failed Grievous here. Not much protection for a beating heart behind a plastic chest piece.
Yeah, very uncivilized. You're right. The lizard was cooler than it sounds, but I will say that one felt out of place for me a little bit. I don't know why. I don't know if it was the chirping that the lizard did or what have you. But I did. I liked that scene. I love the Grievous scene in here. I actually really like General Grievous as a character. I probably could do without some of the asthmatic stuff, but I think it's cool to show that he was at least part human or part organic being at one point. The one really kind of just a tiny thing that I noticed, and I actually remember I noticed it on opening night too. There's when Obi-Wan and Grievous are fighting, Obi-Wan tries to kick Grievous, and he hits him in the shin, and he winces because he's hitting metal, which I appreciate. That he's like, oh, but no, I like this entire scene. This is a good scene. The one thing that always stood out to me, and I don't know if it was a flaw in Obi-Wan or a flaw in the Jedi in general, the fact that he jumped down into that what can only be described of pit of droids, one guy against I don't know how many there were, the confidence that this dude had to do that. I don't know if that's arrogance or confidence or I don't know. It struck me this time.
It made no sense, but it was a cool scene. So I guess we got to just chalk it up to that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, back on Coruscant, Palpatine continues to poison Anakin while revealing his true nature. Anakin takes this information back to Mace Windu, who assembles a group of Jedi to go arrest Palpatine for being the Sith Lord. Palpatine will have none of it, and a battle ensues as he skewers pretty much every Jedi but Master Windu. And I got to be honest, having watched this again, I thought the mood going into the scene was really good because there was this really dark, ominous music. And again, props to John Williams for everything he did. But when Palpatine starts fighting with his saber, it just doesn't look right to me. And it's not selling me on his swordsmanship. And I don't know if that's because they tried to put too much of Ian McDiarmid into this role, but there was something that was just kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, elfish about it, where it was just he was, it didn't come across as menacing. It came across a little bit goofy.
Yeah, I think what's going on here, because I saw it too, and I'm going to leave aside for a moment. I will come back to it. The fucking worthless 3 Jedi that were there with Mace Windu. I'll come back to that. But you're right. I think what Attack of the Clones did so well, one scene in specifically was when Dooku was on screen, specifically when he's fighting Yoda. It's Christopher Lee as the character, but when he's fighting Yoda, the transition between Christopher Lee and what is clearly a stunt double is almost unrecognizable. You almost can't really tell when it's Lee and when it's the other guy. And you're right. Here, and it's not Ian McDiarmid's fault. I'm sure he's not a swordsman, and I don't know how old he was at this time, but you're right. There's too much where you can tell which one is which, and they're trying to do too much with McDiarmid And you're right. It's got like kind of a, it's going to sound weird. It's kind of like a Cornholio vibe where he's like, he's like kind of poking, he's poking at him with and it's this weird, really weird lightsaber style where he's like poking rather than striking. And I seem to remember, and I don't know if you've ever read this novel, the novelization of Revenge of the Sith has a lot more specifically around this scene. And I seem to remember there was like he was recording this entire interaction, and he had a button where he was like turning on and off, where he was essentially editing what everybody else could hear. Does this ring a bell at all, or am I just totally misremembering this?
I didn't read that book, so I can't say for sure.
I'm almost positive that I'm remembering, like, somebody was listening, right? And he would let them listen to the pieces of the dialogue that made him look good and made the Jedi look bad, and then would like mute when he would, again, I don't want to go into a false memory, but anyways, it's a long way of saying, yes, I agree. I think what we're seeing here is too much McDermott and not enough stunt double. I have to circle back around to the three Jedi that are just little bitches. They die. They just are, right? I mean, it's like, presumably, I understand that there's levels of Jedi, right?
Sure.
You've got
they're
masters.
They're trying to show Palpatine as being just complete badass.
Right. Okay, I guess, but
they didn't do it.
No, the first three are literally dead in, I don't know, 8 or 9 seconds, while Windu just kind of stands around and watches them get filleted, and then Windu's a badass, right? And Windu essentially beats him, which is cool. But yeah, you're right. That from the time he kind of grabs his saber out of his coat until it's just one-on-one with him and Windu is kind of clunky.
Anakin shows up as Mace Windu is about to best Palpatine and completes his heel turn when he amputates Mace Windu, and it allows Palpatine to basically launch him into the Coruscant night skies. And now we are officially at the part of our podcast where we talk about where we are with the fall of Anakin Skywalker. So what I'll say is, to this point, Anakin's descent has been really believable, and I'm going with it, like up until this very point. And I will even go as far as to say I believe the parts where he attacks Windu and wants to side with Palpatine. The part where it really totally loses me is when he's like, sure, I'll go murder a bunch of Jedi. No problem. That's what I'm signing up for. So I like the buildup. Everything worked a lot smoother for me this time through. And, Anakin's not wrong for challenging Mace Windu because he wanted to basically murder Palpatine at that point. But what happens here and where it goes from here is where I start to really have a problem, because it basically just goes fast forward into complete evil.
Here's where I start to have problems with this film, and you hit it on the head, and I've said it a bunch of times. This trilogy and this movie had one job, and it was to show the fall. And yes, I think the Dooku thing was a little bit quick, but I get it, right? And especially everything that has happened between Dooku and now, with the tragedy of Darth Plagueis and this thing, and even when Palpatine revealed himself to Anakin was still conflicted, right? He went to Windu. He told him, hey, this is the Sith Lord, blah, 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 this, that, and the other thing. I agree with you again that it even makes sense to me that Anakin would cut off Windu's hand. Like I get, like, that all makes sense. You're right. Where it takes the 90-degree turn again. I can even understand him stopping Windu, and then Palpatine kills Windu, or presumably kills him. We don't know for sure, but presumably. From there to rise Darth Vader, you're right. Fast forward is the best way to describe it. And then it's another like fast forward from I'm Darth Vader to I'm going to kill anybody that's in my ways, including younglings.
Yes.
It just, again, it's not earned. I can understand why he would kill Windu, even kill Windu. He didn't, but because he needed to save Padme, and he thought that Palpatine was his way to save Padme. I have a hard time understanding how he goes from I love my wife, I love the mother of my unborn children, to I'm going to slaughter innocent children. That's I just can't get there. Even after all these viewings and even after Obi-Wan Kenobi series, I can't get there.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to the children part for sure, but even just murdering all the Jedi, like that, it happened like within seconds of him being named a Sith Lord.
It did, and I think that's why I read that initial passage at the very beginning of the podcast, where I think a lot of that, I think the reason he was willing to do that was left on the cutting room floor because he had this distrust of the Jedi and the fact that they wouldn't make him a master and they wouldn't do this and they wouldn't do that. But again, I don't know. On screen, though, it wasn't earned.
Right.
But that's why I read that. You're right.
But I think they did a pretty good job up until this point playing his frustration against the Jedi. Like and even his mistrust. But frustration and mistrust doesn't graduate to murder quite as quickly as it did in this movie. So that's where I think I would like to believe there's a lot on the cutting room floor, because I don't, there's a transition here that's just too abrupt for me.
Yep, I agree.
So with that, we have Darth Vader. And the only other comment I have on this particular scene is the weird voice modulation stuff that's going on with Palpatine. Like, I don't understand that. Every time I watch that, he's like, where are you? And I don't get it.
I mean, I could hazard a guess, or I could retcon something where I don't know. Did the lightning mess up his voice, his vocal cords? I don't know. That's the only that doesn't even make any sense, though.
I suppose that's weird. Like, I don't know why that would be a conscious choice.
It's totally weird. Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing is, the Emperor sounded a certain way in Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back, and we needed to make this character that hasn't been talking like that talk like that. I don't know. I mean, because of reasons,
What I do appreciate is the minute he put up the hood, he basically talked like the Emperor.
Yeah. What did you think about the way because he was still kind of a squirrely dude, even so he was beaten, right? Windu beat him. If Anakin doesn't show up, Windu kills him, and this is done.
Right.
Just talk to me for a minute about what do you think about, like, are we still loving Palpatine as a character here? Because I love him even more than I used to. Just like the fact that he's a squirrely dude and he will say and do anything that he needs to do.
Yeah.
And yes, he becomes the Emperor. But here's what I picked up in this watching. The Emperor isn't this all-powerful badass Sith Lord that we always knew and loved. I mean, he is, but he's also the used car salesman of Sith, right? He'll say anything that he needs to. I don't know. Did you pick up on that, or am I wrong?
I mean, I think so. I saw him as a politician, right? I saw him as a politician who's graduated into this really evil, maniacal person who clearly had aspirations to rule the entire galaxy.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I do agree with that. I do think that makes sense. So, as I mentioned, Palpatine orders Anakin to kill everyone in the Jedi Temple and then go to Mustafar and wipe out the separatist leaders that he helped put in place to make room for what will eventually be the Empire. And, we've already covered that. This is where his willingness to do that really sort of escapes me, and I don't understand that. Order 66 is then initiated, turning on and killing most of the Jedi warriors in what is truly a very powerful scene, including Anakin slaughtering off camera a bunch of children. And, this to me to this day is still a really heavy scene. I mean, there's a couple things going on here. There is the clone troopers who are turning on all the Jedi and killing them. And then you've got Anakin, who's basically just Jason Voorheesing his way through the Jedi Temple. But then he gets to this room where there are children hiding, and he lights a saber. And of course, they don't show it on camera, but like he basically murders children. And I'm just wondering, like, is that too far? Did Lucas maybe go too far? Like, for me personally, it's not too far, but let's not forget, we're supposed to forgive Darth Vader for the sins of his past by the end of Return of the Jedi. And I don't know, I'm not sure murdering children is ever something I can really get over.
Part of the problem that they have had was, so again, before,
like, why children? Like, why did they have to take it to that far?
Well,
I'm not offended by it. I'm just asking from a story perspective.
Yeah,
what was
I can only imagine it's because again, when you look at prequel trilogy, Darth Vader was probably on the every list of best villains ever.
Oh yeah.
The biggest badass, blah, blah. Because again, all you knew about him was what you had from Star Wars Jedi or Star Wars Empire and Jedi, right? And then what we have done with the prequel trilogy is we have literally humanized him, right? And we needed to show how you get that little kid, how you go from that little kid to literally the worst villain ever. And so you needed to have him do something that was so heinous and so terrible. And what's worse than killing children? I agree that where you have a problem is, you're right. We're supposed to redeem him at the end of the day. Yeah. And I don't know that that's redeemable, but
that was a tough one. Like that still sits weird with me. Again, I don't mind the scene. I actually like the fact that they use that to make him more evil, but knowing what I know about where the story is eventually going to go, now it seems like maybe they went a little too far. If you still want me to believe that Anakin Skywalker has been redeemed and is now a Force ghost out in the world.
Yeah, but and I guess here's the thing, right? It's like, let's just say that we're behind, or we understand Anakin going from I love my wife to I'm going to kill all the Jedi. Let's just say, for argument's sake, we buy that. There's a difference in my mind between a full-fledged Jedi Knight / master and a youngling, right?
Sure.
I mean, there just is, right? And so we could talk about, it's a tough leap to make. I can't get there.
So back on Kashyyyk, Yoda does what he does best, and he bails. That's just what Yoda does. And he says he's going to miss Chewbacca. And I remember earlier when he told Anakin not to miss people. Sounds like an attachment to me, a hypocritical little muppet. Like what? Like that's kind of a shitty thing to say.
Well, I think one thing that this trilogy, probably certainly more than the original trilogy, shows us is the Jedi are fallible. Like they're not perfect. The original trilogy, the Jedi were kind of these monks, right? They were these religious monks that really could do no wrong, and they were above reproach and blah blah blah. I don't know. What I take out of these movies is they're not infallible. And to your point, right? Yoda's doing some stuff here and saying some things that are in direct opposition to what we know as the Jedi teachings.
Yeah, and we're going to get there, but Yoda turns out to be one of my least favorite characters in this trilogy.
Yeah,
because of some of the decisions that he makes, and whether or not we want to blame George Lucas on that is a topic for another conversation. But yeah, I mean, Yoda is just he's I can't stand him in this movie, and I'll get to some more examples. Yeah. Why that is the case. Obi-Wan and Yoda head back to Coruscant to recalibrate a signal that was calling the Jedi back to the temple, which I actually think is kind of clever, which was set by Anakin to try to get all the Jedi to come back so he could murder the rest of them. And that's where they learn that Anakin is behind this Jedi massacre. Soon after Anakin cauterizes all of the major organs of the separatist leaders, Palpatine essentially declares himself the Emperor as he creates the first galactic empire. And then Padme confronts Anakin on Mustafar and learns of his deception. Obi-Wan appears from the ship as Anakin force chokes his pregnant wife, thinking she has betrayed him. After some surprisingly decent dialogue, we get what I think is going to end up being the best lightsaber fight in the entire saga. But I'm curious. I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but what are your thoughts on what, how we're getting ready to wrap this whole thing up and this lightsaber fight between Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor?
Yes, I agree. It's the best of the saga, like bar none. It has, not only is it the best from a physical perspective, but it's the best from a kind of gravitas perspective in terms of like what's at stake.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
I mean, it's long, but it's intense. Like it is super intense, and they are hitting their marks all the way through this thing.
Yeah.
Like they are going fast and they're going furious. Forgive the no pun intended.
Right.
It's really good the way that they're playing this off. It's believable. Like you can tell that they're pissed and they're going at it.
Right. The one thing, and it's a theme that we've talked about several times on this podcast is this idea of fast forward, right? As you were going through the recap there, I wonder where the other senators and the other people in the Republic, what are their thoughts, right? Are they on board with this empire? Are they on board with, do they buy the story that the Jedis are all bad? Or are they just like, what the fuck's going on? Like this, wait, this guy is the I don't know. Again, because it's told in fast forward. I wonder if it was too fast for them as well as it was for the viewers.
That's a good question. I think we're led to believe that they are all on board with this because you get that scene with McDermott as Palpatine and sort of newly transformed into the Emperor, and he's given this very grandiose speech when he declares he's creating the first galactic empire, and everybody's cheering, and the camera pans to Natalie Portman and she says, so this is the death of liberty or something like that, or this is how liberty dies,
with thunderous applause.
And this is, I think, their way of telling us like he has got everybody. Like there are a few people out there that are not following along, such as Palpatine and such as Yoda,
Jimmy Smits,
and whatever, Bail Organa and that group. But for the most part, it's everybody's kind of falling in line with what's going on, and that's how I think the empire gets created.
And again, fast forward is the perfect, that's a perfect way to describe it, right? So you get Padme walking off the ship, and again, to this point, we're to understand that everything that Anakin has done is for the love of his wife and the fear that she's going to die in childbirth. That's what this movie has told us, right?
Yes, right.
And so to see him go from that, to see him go from, I'm going to cut off Master Windu's arm, to, okay, I'll be Darth Vader, to, okay, I'll kill younglings, to, oh shit, Obi-Wan's here, fuck you, I'm going to choke you. That's again another fast forward that I have a really hard time. Like I get him being pissed. But if he's done all of these things in the name of love, in the name of for Padme, I can't. I have a hard time getting behind. Not only like seeing Obi-Wan is going to lead me to want to kill you.
Right. I think that the story is not told very cleanly, but I think what we're supposed to believe is that he thinks that Padme has betrayed him, and in doing so, he's descended so far into the Sith madness that he can't control himself. And if she has betrayed him, that was the one thing he was fighting for. So now he's just going to lose his mind and take it out on her.
Okay.
So
That makes sense.
I don't think they do a good enough job showing us that, but I think that's what we're led to believe.
That makes sense. Yeah. This, I don't know what it is, 15, 20 minutes. This next fight scene there's a couple hokey pieces in it, but you're right. It is just, it's light your saber, balls to the wall. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to do anything I can do to win this fight, period, paragraph, end of story. And even though they're cutting away to other Order 66 stuff, this, that, and the other thing, and what Yoda's doing, and it's just a pretty intense fight from beginning to end. And I love it. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's a good point. So they do a lot of cuts back and forth, and I'm trying not to, as I'm telling the story, follow the cuts just because this would be a lot longer. So I'm kind of separating that. But it's a really good point that you make, because the drama is really heightened right now by the fact that Jedis are getting murdered on one side of the galaxy, and on this planet Mustafar, we've got Anakin and Obi-Wan, who were formerly best friends, a couple days ago, fighting for their lives and going at it against each other. And it's a really intense, last probably 20 minutes of this movie. And then Yoda limps his way into Palpatine's chambers, where the two have a kind of fun but unexpectedly one-sided battle before the Jedi ultimately retreats. And I guess this is the opportunity to go ahead and say it. What the hell is Yoda in this series? Like, is he possibly one of the worst characters in this movie? I mean, the whole into exile, I must go. Why? Why is he going into exile? I understand continuity and we have to get him to Dagobah somehow, but what is the rationale behind having him run away?
I have nothing. I mean,
it's not your question to answer.
Yeah, I got nothing.
But I just, like, I'm sitting here trying. I mean, they have destroyed Yoda in my mind as a character in this movie, because he just sucks. Like, he used to be the coolest and the wisest, and like, man, I would follow this guy into the fire. And then I see him in this series and I'm just like, no, he's terrible. He's hypocritical and he's running away from everything. He's not fighting. And he hasn't won a single lightsaber fight. He's been in a couple of them. He doesn't win any of them. And it's just like, why? Why does he have to go in exile? Like, it made zero sense. Because I guess maybe because he thought there was going to be a manhunt for him because he was a Jedi. But like, I don't know, like, he doesn't know all of that at this point, right? Like, he doesn't know the entire backstory of what's going on. So why does he?
No. And in fact, when he says that line about, I got to go into exile, he doesn't even know if Obi-Wan or Anakin won their duel. He has no idea.
No.
So, like, all he knows is he got his ass kicked and Obi-Wan is out on his own against Anakin. That's all he knows at that point. And you're right. He just packs it in. It's like, okay, I'm going to the swamp. I'm out.
Yeah.
Which is a bummer.
To me, it's probably the single most disappointing thing about this entire series. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with the way they handled the Anakin thing, but I can't go as far as to say it's disappointing. I'll just say I don't agree with it. This is disappointing. This is completely misusing a character that I thought was beloved and should have been held in much more reverence. And he's basically a complete fucking chump in this series.
Like, you know what? It's funny, and I guess I've never really thought about it, but it really calls into question the reverence that Luke gives to Yoda,
right,
in Empire and Jedi, right? Because if he would have known, right, it just does. If he would have known why why Yoda is sitting on a swamp planet, he might not have given him the reverence that he did.
Yeah, I mean, it makes us all wonder why we're giving him that reverence, and it just seems like such a curious choice by Lucas from a story perspective to do this. But I honestly think it was just an afterthought with all the politics and all the Anakin stuff going on. They're like, shit, we got to get Yoda to Dagobah. How are we going to do that? But we'll just have him run away. And unfortunately, they did that so many times in this series. It's just like, I can't stand him. I think he's terrible.
Yeah. No, I agree.
After about 7 or 8 minutes of intense acrobatic fighting, Obi-Wan notoriously gets the high ground and amputates most of Anakin as he leaps toward him. And Obi-Wan laments the decisions of his former friend and then leaves him for dead. It's a really powerful scene. I really like how this scene ends with Anakin screaming and catching fire and all that. And, you know, I'll question in the Obi-Wan series why he didn't kill Darth Vader a lot, but I don't question why he didn't do it here. And he clearly pitied him, and he was really emotional and upset about it. But I thought this scene was really great the way that it ended.
I agree. I think that he thought Anakin was dead. I don't think he thought there was any way that Anakin would survive not only his wounds from getting at this point 3 limbs cut off, but
yeah, can we talk about that real quick? I get the legs. How did he get the other arm cut off? Like, did he slash a couple times? Like, I'm not.
I don't know. Yeah, it was.
I don't know how you get 2 legs in 1 arm with 1 slash like that.
I suppose maybe that. Yeah, I suppose maybe there's some because Anakin was flipping, so maybe 1 saber cut got. I don't know. I'm
sure. Okay, I'll go with that. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, between that and then catching on fire and then being, I don't know, inches away from the molten lava anyways, I can only assume that the reason Obi-Wan walked away was A, he already thought he was dead or dying, and B, he couldn't bring himself to do anything else, because at this point Obi-Wan still looks at Anakin as a brother, and he's just so heartbroken and disappointed, and he's doing what he has done for the last several minutes out of necessity, not out of hate. It's not that he hates Anakin. He actually loves Anakin, but he's doing it because he has to do it.
I definitely think it's option B. That's where I like to land on this particular scene. And this is where we need to continue to give Ewan McGregor props for all the acting that he's doing in this movie, because he's selling this in ways that I don't necessarily think that it's being written. And that's why I think this scene is so powerful.
Even when Obi-Wan gets back on the ship and he's sitting, I'm trying to remember the scene, but he's sitting up front. I think it's with C-3PO. And he just kind of puts his head in his hand, right? And he's just like, oh my God, I can't believe I had to do that. I can't believe that just happened. You can feel the angst that Ewan McGregor is portraying. And again, that dude is just such an amazing actor. It's crazy.
He really is. He's fantastic. I do hope we get to see him suit up as Obi-Wan at least one more time. That would be great. I don't know how we see that, but hope we do. So Obi-Wan gets Padme to some sort of space hospital where she is able to introduce us both to Luke and Leia for the first time before dying of sadness. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. This is galactically stupid, pun intended. I mean, we knew that she had to die and she had to have the babies before she died, but couldn't we have done better than this? I mean, what the fuck was this?
Dying of a broken heart is as bad as I have to go into exile, right? I mean,
I think it's worse. I can understand somebody being shamed and wanting to run away. I can't understand somebody dying because they're sad. I mean, it is the dumbest thing in the entire prequel trilogy. It is worse than anything I think that happened.
And you know what? And here's the thing that's really a bummer. They didn't need to do it, because the only reason that we know she died of a broken heart or whatever the fuck it was because that droid had that one line.
Yes, that's true.
If they would have left that one line out, then we could have said, oh, you know what? Hey, Anakin force choked her and eventually she died, whatever. But
I think Lucas felt like he had to give a reason for her death. And I think that he was also trying to draw some kind of parallel between her dying and Anakin becoming Darth Vader. I don't really know what that parallel is, but they were bouncing between those two scenes.
Well, yeah, I mean,
they were intercutting there, and I can understand that. but I don't know why. Like, I don't know why one leads to the other. Like, they're saying that once he becomes Darth Vader, she's so sad that she dies. Like, what?
I don't know if they're doing that, or if they're doing, if they're making it so that like her death is his final turn towards Vader. I don't know. It's thin at best.
Yeah, I think, to your point, a little bit better dialogue could have saved that scene. And somehow, like saying that there's no medical reason, she's just dying. She's really sad. I mean, I don't know. It was just the dumbest fucking thing I've ever.
It was bad.
It was so bad. They could have killed her so many different ways. So Palpatine rescues what's left of his apprentice and takes him back for an upgrade. And with that, we get our first look of the iconic glossy black outfit of Darth Vader. Sadly, the cool factor is erased in less than a parsec when he screams, "No!" after learning Padme has died. I mean, this scene was legitimately really cool, and it was the first time we got to see, or I should say, the first time we got to hear James Earl Jones voicing Darth Vader again. But wow, did that end? I mean, look, let's just call it what it is. Like, any scene in any movie where someone shouts to the heavens like that is fucking cheese dick as it could possibly be. But when Darth Vader does it, it's just like, that was cringeworthy. I remember being in the theater and going, "Oh no, please stop, make it stop." I mean, the inner me was going, "No," as he was going, "No," and it was terrible. It was really hurtful.
The no is you can't defend it. You can't. I mean, that scene would have been great up until that. Right? I mean, it was a good scene.
It was perfect. It was really good.
Yeah. I don't know how you could have ended that scene and made it, because again, it was awesome up until that scene, right? He stands up, he's upset, he destroys everything on the set, he destroys everything on the medical frigate and whatever. And that all made perfect sense. He's furious that again, it was a lie, but he killed his wife. You can't defend it. It was terrible.
I think if you take some of the aggression that he showed in the Obi-Wan series and sort of mimic that, it could have been great. Like, all you got to do is cut that no dialogue and just have him so pissed off that he's taking droids and he's shoving them all over the room and just like waving his arms and destroying everything. And Palpatine sits there and he gets that little smile on his face and all that. Like, if he just fucks everything up in that room, it still works. He doesn't have to do this trope where he screams up to the heavens, and it just it was so I'm like, Lucas, come on, man, you're so close to being done with this movie, and that's what you do. Like, that's I don't know where that comes from.
And I guess what boggles my mind is, like, that made it past multiple producers and like multiple people looked at that and were like, okay. I guess it's just like Lucas has final say, right? It has to be, because
not a lot of people say no to Lucas, is my guess.
Right. But again, no, I can't fathom that there weren't a dozen people that were like, "Hey, George, this is not great." Right.
Including
and again,
James Earl Jones, who had to deliver that fucking awful line.
And again, I guess ultimately, like, if it was the fact that it's in the film tells me that Lucas was like, "Nope, gotta have it. We need to know." Okay. Like, right.
I guess. So Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Bail Organa agree to split up the children, and Yoda tells young Ben he will get a chance to talk to Qui-Gon, which will pay off in about 17 years. They wipe the droids' minds because, hey, continuity, and then move to a somber funeral of our fallen senator. We then see the Organas beaming over their new bundle of joy as Ben drops Luke off in Tatooine to hide in plain sight, I guess. And the movie ends with the familiar swell of the maestro's amazing Force theme as we fade to the stars. And so ends the prequel trilogy. So there we are.
I love the scene at the end where you have Palpatine and Tarkin and Vader looking out over the the Death Star. I
Yes.
love that.
Yeah, that was super cool.
It was really cool, especially once when you kind of start to layer in that the timeline with Rogue One and all these other things, but we didn't have it at this point. Again, once you got past the rest of the way they kind of ended it, I love the fact that they give us a teaser about Qui-Gon. I love the fact that we're in the Tantive 4, which is the same set from New Hope. I like all that. I'm fine with the way this movie ended.
I do too. I like the twin sons at the end. Mm-hmm. I think that's a nice touch. That's how they ended the sequel trilogy as well. Mm-hmm. And I think anytime that you could do that, it's good. It's interesting to me though, like the twin son scene became obviously iconic from the original trilogy, but that's not how the original trilogy ended. But that is how the other two trilogies ended, which is really interesting.
Yeah. All right. So and we didn't touch on it at the beginning, but I'm going to go back. So do you remember how you were feeling after Attack of the Clones heading into this movie? Do you remember how you felt?
I think I was looking forward to this based off of a couple things. First of all, the trailers. I remember the trailers being interesting and, teasing just enough of what I wanted to see. But obviously, regardless of how bad that second movie was and how maybe the first movie didn't age as well as I had hoped, I knew the third movie was the one. That was the one where, good or bad, right or wrong, this is where we were going to get what we came for. Mm-hmm. And so from that perspective, regardless of the first two movies, I was excited. I was definitely looking forward to it. Okay. But what about you? Same? No?
Yeah, very similar because again, going into this movie or going into this trilogy, I was of the opinion that this trilogy has one job. It was to show the fall of Anakin to Darth Vader. In my opinion, after two movies, we hadn't got there at all. And so I was like, okay, well, if my premise is right, that it has one job, then that one job is happening 100% in this third movie. And I was excited to see where we went.
Yeah. And from that perspective, interestingly enough, and I'm not sure if this was going to be one of your questions, but this is one of the most rewatchable. This maintains its status as being one of the most rewatchable movies of this prequel trilogy. I cannot revisit Clones. I very rarely revisit Phantom Menace. This movie, I can watch it. It's I don't agree with all of it, but it's not a bad movie.
No, it's not. And it's funny. So my wife had never seen a single Star Wars movie ever prior to being married to me, which is crazy. The first time she watched any of these movies was in the lead up to the release of The Force Awakens. She had never seen any of them. So we sat down. So that's the last time before this rewatch. That's the last time I watched Revenge of the Sith. So when was that? That was 2000 and
17?
When did 17?
Yeah. Okay. When Force Awakens came out.
Right. And so I had coming out of that rewatching in 2017, I actually had a really bad taste in my mouth for this movie. But in retrospect, you're right. This is the one that you can rewatch. You can come back to multiple times and you can rewatch. Attack of the Clones is almost unwatchable. The Phantom Menace, there's a couple good scenes in there, but again, in the kind of pantheon of Star Wars films, it's kind of worthless and it's kind of irrelevant. This one, though, there's still a lot going on. And again, after watching Kenobi, coming back to this one is better after watching Kenobi. I'm glad I waited until I watched that to come back to this because that one really does add a lot more to this film.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I find myself, if I'm watching one of these prequel movies, revisiting this one more so than any of the other ones.
So again, come 2005, at the time, we thought this was the last Star Wars movie that we would ever get. There was no Rey and Finn, that wasn't for several years. Do you remember kind of how you felt coming out of this? Were you satisfied? Well, I guess the ultimate question is, was the prequel trilogy a success? Were we better? Was the Star Wars franchise better off for having the prequel trilogy, or should we have left it with the OG?
Man, that's a really tough question. I am going to answer that by saying I don't think the prequel trilogy made Star Wars better. I don't necessarily think it made it worse, but the prequel trilogy didn't specifically, for me personally, enhance my love for Star Wars, because the original trilogy was all I ever needed. I mean, I'm glad that we got more content, but ultimately, if we would have stopped after the prequel trilogy came out, I would have been fine with that. I mean, I'd always in my heart wanted, let me take a step back. I guess if you'd have asked me after the original trilogy what I really wanted, I would not have said I want 3 movies that took place before the original trilogy. I wanted 3 sequels.
Yeah, nobody would. Yeah.
So in a sense, I guess at the time, I probably would have said, yeah, this was great, this was amazing, but that's just because it was new Star Wars content. But what I ultimately really wanted was a sequel. I wanted to see what was happening with Han Solo, with Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia, and all of the ancillary characters. So I don't know if that answers the question at all, but I will say that this prequel trilogy didn't. If I honestly think that if we hadn't had this, I wouldn't feel any less about Star Wars.
Okay. No, that's fair. I would tend to agree with that. To me, this movie or this trilogy is kind of like Solo, the movie Solo, in that it gave us answers to questions that we weren't really asking.
Yeah. Well,
you know what I mean? Like,
so did Obi-Wan, if you really want to get technical.
It did. But the difference is Obi, in my opinion, Obi-Wan, the last 2 episodes of Obi-Wan I thought were amazing, because they showed a lot of the Vader Obi-Wan interaction. Again, the Obi-Wan series, I think, actually created more questions than it solved. But again, like I guess my point in the Solo comparison is, like, I didn't need to know why Solo's last name was Solo. Like, I didn't need to know that. I didn't need to know why he had dice. I didn't need to know why he had the gun that
Yeah.
It didn't enhance the character. In fact, it might have detracted from the character of Han Solo to learn some of that stuff, right?
It made it worse because it felt like they were going overboard with the fan service. To me, that was my impression of it, is that it was like, and we don't need that shit. Like, that's just that's goofy.
And so again, I guess to your point, I guess it's kind of interesting to understand why I should care about Anakin Skywalker and his redemption. But I don't know that I care any more about his redemption after watching this trilogy than I did in 1983 when Return of the Jedi ended. You know what I mean? Like, sure. I don't, in fact, to your point and to our discussion earlier, like, this motherfucker killed a bunch of kids. I might not get behind it as much as I did in 83, right? Because I didn't know that in 83.
Well, what I will say is that I'm interested in the story. I would have been more interested in better stories, because I think they could have told these stories better. I think if you had, I don't know, I'll just use an example, the Russo brothers, because they did such a fucking incredible job with the Marvel movies towards the end of phase 3 or whatever. If you would have had somebody as smart as that sit down and write 3 movies and see them all through, I think you could have made a story about Anakin Skywalker that would have been amazing and compelling, and could have even potentially rivaled, the magic of the original trilogy. I don't think that's what we got here. So I think that maybe part of my reasoning for saying that I'm sort of ambivalent to this is just because the product wasn't really what I thought it could have been.
So I got a couple more questions. As a standalone, Is Revenge of the Sith a recommendable film?
Hard to say because I don't feel like it's a standalone movie, but I will say that it is. I definitely came away from this viewing appreciating it more than I have in the past, or maybe forgiving it a little bit more. And I would say that it's the best movie of the original, or excuse me, the best movie of the prequel trilogy.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I'd say I would have to explain to somebody why.
Sure. Right.
I would have to give a lot of context to that, but yeah, I do think it's a recommendable movie.
Okay. So so you just hit my next question. I was gonna say rank the prequel trilogy. So it's got to be this, The Phantom Menace, and Attack of the
for
Clones,
sure.
right? It's got to be. Okay.
It's 100%. Yeah, that's no doubt. And I don't even know. I'm not a movie critic enough to know whether this was the best of the movies in terms of coherent storytelling and all that. I just know this is the only one I can tolerate revisiting, to be honest.
Right. So one of the other questions that I put on here, and I don't know that we've ever done this, but it's not in retrospect, and I'm looking at it now, it's not a question that we can just kind of do right now. I think it's probably another podcast, but I think we should rank all of the Star Wars movies from top to bottom. Again, we're not going to do it now, just because we could talk for another half an hour about it. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. We probably know what's number one, and we probably know what's at the bottom.
Yeah,
but
the in between would be interesting. Yeah,
in between would be interesting. So I'm kind of to the end of my notes here. Do you have any other kind of last thoughts around not only the Revenge of the Sith, but this kind of marks the end of our retrospective of the entire prequel saga? Got any other final thoughts?
I mean, I definitely enjoyed this a lot. It was a bit of a labor of love, just kind of getting through, well, certainly the first two movies. This one, the Revenge of the Sith went a lot better. And I think maybe my big takeaway from this is that I've learned to respect the Revenge of the Sith a little bit more than what I had up until this point. And maybe it's because I've just been too hard on it. Maybe it's because Obi-Wan kind of opened my eyes to the things that maybe really mattered about this movie. But I'm coming away from this last movie with a much better impression than I thought that I had previously. And I think that was worth the journey of doing all of these movies again, is to get a chance to really give this one some more thought. And it was, if I'm being honest, kind of fun to shit on Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that is I don't know that I'll ever go back and watch that movie again. I don't, like, I have no reason to.
I mean, I certainly hope not. I remember when we started, or when we first discussed the idea of doing a deep dive on this prequel trilogy, I'm like, oh fuck, 1/3 of this is gonna be really painful.
Just be terrible. Yeah.
But
this was fun. I enjoyed this. I'm glad we did it. We did the sequel trilogy, we did the prequel trilogy. I don't know that we necessarily need to do the original trilogy, because we talk about those movies kind of so much. Have you given any thought? I think it's time, podcast wise, I think it's time to go away from Star Wars for a while.
Yes.
Have you given any thought to what we're going to talk about next, which I can guarantee you will not be 2 months from now?
No, it definitely will not be 2 months from now. And no, to be honest with you, I don't know where we're going to go next. I think we should go away from Star Wars, maybe even away from movies. But here's what I will say is that, is slightly off topic, I think I know the next deep dive we're probably going to take on, and that will most likely be in October when Halloween ends. And I'm looking forward to that, because we talked about Halloween Kills. We didn't really do a deep dive on the first Halloween reboot, the 2018. Thank you.
Yeah.
But we did Halloween Kills, and I know that we both came away with that very favorably, and it'll be interesting. I'm sure we'll both rewatch that before Halloween Ends comes out. I'm looking forward to doing a deep dive on that.
I'm all on board. Yeah. So if for those of you that have not listened to it, go back in the archives. That's episode 58 of the podcast. We did a deep dive into Halloween Kills. I'm assuming that you saw the new trailer for Halloween Ends that dropped the other day.
I did. In fact, I was the one that posted it on that awesome site, scaretissue.com, on our social media feeds. And it's funny. I watched it and I was maybe a tad bit underwhelmed, but it was because it was a true teaser. Like there was nothing to it.
There's nothing there. Yeah.
And I have actually, I don't know if I'm going to be able to muster the willpower to actually follow through on this, but I don't want to watch any more trailers for it. But like whatever comes out, I don't want to see.
Wow.
Because I already know I'm going to go see this movie. I already know for a fact I will see it on opening weekend. So I almost want to go into it with as much surprise, with as much unknown to it as possible. So I'm going to try to do that. I've always wanted to do that and I've never been successful. So I will probably fail, but I want to try to go in as not spoiler free, because they won't spoil it in the trailers, but I just don't want to know anything about that movie going into it.
Yeah, I'm pumped for that. Again, as we've talked about on several podcasts, I think Michael Myers has kind of inched up my list of favorite bad guys. It's really interesting. Like that Halloween Kills flick was really polarizing, and I didn't think it would be. I just assumed that most people would have loved it kind of the way we did, and it really was polarizing. So I'm really interested to see kind of how not only the uber fans of the franchise, but also the casual slasher fans take that film in. I mean, really intrigued to see how obviously how the film is, but how it's received on top of that.
Yeah, I agree. And I sincerely hope that I love it. I don't know if I will or not. I think that I do think that they will go more towards fan service in this last movie. If I had to,
they have to, right? They almost have to.
Yeah, which is exactly what Halloween Kills didn't do. And one of the reasons that I really liked it and respected it, because they took a very different approach to that movie. Yeah. And I don't know if I'll like it as much if we go back to sort of the Laurie versus Michael angle, as we kind of thought that it was. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. But this Halloween, I think, is going to be really exciting to be able to sit through what will most certainly be the last time we ever see Jamie Lee Curtis go up against the Shape.
Yeah. All right. So with that, we're done with our prequel deep dive review. It was awesome. Thank you for leading us through this. I appreciate it very much.
It was amazing.
It was amazing. And I'm really looking forward to, I'll be honest with you, I'm looking forward to getting back to some sort of a schedule on our podcast where we can just talk about just whatever, whether it's movies or music or pop culture or wrestling or whatever the fuck we want to talk about. But I can promise you, I don't want it to be 2 months from now.
And I can promise you that it won't be 2 months from now. We'll certainly find the time and we'll do this. And I will be happy to do that research for sure.
All right. With that being said, I was joined once again by my brother from another mother, Mr. Pip. My name is Chewie, and this has been the 411 from 406. Thanks for joining us, folks. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Adios. You do some vocal warm-ups, you can.
Right.
Too far.
Right.